Hey guys, it's Katie and I'm here today to bring you a new original tag video. This is called the Attorney Book Tag and it was heavily inspired by Vendi from Caught Between Pages several months ago. Plus, I just finished taking the bar, so I figured it would be the perfect time for me to put this up. Vendi also inspired a couple of the questions in here, so I'm also going to kind of just give her a lot of credit for this video, just the inspiration behind it, and also for the couple of questions that I ended up taking from her for it. But other than that, I'm really excited about this one. It should be hopefully a lot of fun for you guys. And without further ado, let's just dive right on in. Number 1, opening statement. What is one of your favorite opening lines of a book? And for this, I'm picking "In a Hole in the Ground There Lived a Hobbit" by J.R.R. Tolkien from, of course, The Hobbit. It's just such a lovely first line. It tells you so much and it piques your interest in so many ways that you just want to keep reading. Like, what's a hobbit? Why do they live in holes? What's this all about? It just really sucks you in and makes you want to keep reading to find out what this thing is. And I just love it. It's one of my all-time favorite opening lines from a book. Number 2, Incompetence. Discuss a book that had poor representation. This can be any kind of representation, LGBT rep, mental health rep, cultural rep, you name it. This question can encompass any of those. But for this, I'm picking a cultural representation, and that is the Grisha Trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. You guys know a lot of my feelings on this, but honestly, my biggest beef with this trilogy is the fact that it basically bastardized Russian culture and the language and the history in so many disrespectful ways that it was just awful. I know that Leigh Bardugo claims that she didn't really base a lot of her world on Russia. It's not supposed to be Russia. It's Russia. Like, I can definitively tell you that it is, because it's a culture that I know well and a culture that I studied at length, and just she did a really poor job with the representation and just the borrowing of elements of a culture and a people in a very disrespectful way. And so I had a lot of issues from that perspective of things. Number 3, Confidentiality. What is a book you secretly love or hate? And this one I think is going to surprise some people, but I'm picking Speak by Laurie Halsey Anderson. I read this book back in my freshman year of high school. I had no idea what it was about before I went into it. And I just remembered being horrified and just kind of bothered by a lot of the way that it was written. I just didn't like a lot of aspects of the book. I understand the importance of the book and the story that it's trying to tell and the way that it's being told and everything, but it just didn't work for me, and I just really did not like it when I read it. And I know it's a really well-beloved book. In fact, when I was in high school, I was like the only person who didn't like that book. I tended to like the books that other people hated and vice versa. And so that was one of the books that I really just didn't like. It just didn't work for me. And as for the book that I secretly love that a lot of people don't know, it's going to be Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. I love Tom Sawyer more than Huckleberry Finn, which I know is a very, very unpopular opinion. But I have a very unique connection and nostalgic factor associated with Tom Sawyer. I read Tom Sawyer on my own for the first time when I was like 6 or 7, and then I had to read it again in 7th or 8th grade, and it was particularly funny because there was one day that I had to get like 4 teeth pulled or something, and then there was a teeth pulling scene in the book, and I just related to that so hard. So I just find Tom Sawyer to be more fun and more relatable than Huckleberry Finn. I enjoyed Huckleberry Finn too, but just definitely not as much as Tom Sawyer. And so I just really, really like that book a lot. and it's not a book that I talk about with people a lot, especially since my opinion is so unpopular, but I really, really enjoy it. Number 4, conflicts of interest. Discuss a book that made you question something you previously had strong feelings about. For this, I'm picking the Animorph series by Kay Applegate. This is the final book of the entire series, and it goes in depth and discusses a topic that I previously never really thought about or had strong feelings one way or another about. During a war, both sides do atrocious, awful, terrible things to each other, but the victor is usually seen as doing it in a good way because they won, and they are not punished for their actions, even though they might be just as despicable, if not more so, than the other side, the losing side. And that really struck me because when we learn history, we learn about the victor. We don't talk much about the losing side. And it's really interesting to me because it's so indoctrinated and taught in such a way where we only learn one side of the story in a lot of ways. We don't learn necessarily about the other side until later in life or until we do the research ourselves. And that book really made me think about all of the terrible crimes that both sides of a war can do. And when I really sat back and thought about it, we don't talk about that. We only talk about the side that is, on trial, or the side that it lost in a negative way. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. During World War II, all sides were bombing different countries for different reasons, and all these innocent lives were dying. And then the United States went to Japan and bombed the hell out of them with the atomic bomb. But we talk about how the A-bomb was a good thing because it ended the war. We don't talk about how it impacted people's lives and how it damaged an entire society. And just, it was like the worst possible thing because it just really decimated certain areas and certain people. And I mean, do we talk a little bit about it now? Yes, but when you really sit back and think about it, and people talk about what ended the war, or one of the things that ended the war, was the bombing of Japan with the A-bomb. And if you think about it, it's just a really despicable, atrocious act. But because it was done in war, and because we were the victor in that case, we're not seen as the bad guy. It really made me question our education system more than I already do, because of the way that they teach certain things, especially in regards to history. And honestly, it's very eye-opening and jarring when you sit back and think about it. Number 5, jury. What's a book you're on the fence about, either on the fence about reading or have mixed feelings about? And since I just did a books that I'm on the fence about video a couple of weeks ago, which I'll link up above if you haven't seen already, I'm going to talk about a book that I have mixed feelings about after I finished reading it. And it's called The Valley of Secrets, and it's by Charmaine Hussey. This is one of those books that I'd had for like 10 years, and it was just sitting on my bookshelf, and I never picked it up. But it had a really pretty cover, and it sounded interesting based on the, blurb on the back or whatever. And then I picked up and I started reading it, and it was kind of interesting. It's about this young boy who, I think he just loses all of his family members, and then he goes to live at his uncle's estate, I think it is, but his uncle is not there or something. There's some funky thing, but he lives at this giant mansion. And he finds out that there are all these creatures and things around there that he's never seen before. And then he finds these journals, and the journals are detailing his uncle's journey to the Amazon and dealing with learning about the culture and the society of the people who lived on the Amazon. But then it just kind of, he was there for a purpose of studying wildlife, I think it was. And, but then ultimately it just kind of like takes a turn and it just decides to go into the territory of genocide and all of this stuff. But it's, if I remember correctly, it's marketed as a fantasy book. And it's also a children's book, I believe. I think it's like ages 9 and up. And I just remember reading it and just being like, this is not what I was expecting. And also, why am I reading about genocide at this particular moment of time? And what is it that I'm even reading in the first place? And it was just a very jarring experience. And then once I finished it, I just didn't know what to think. Like, it was interesting to read, but at the same time, I didn't love it and I wasn't enamored by it. I don't even know. I still don't know how I feel about it, but in the long run, it's also kind of one of those books that, like, once you've sat with it for a while, like you've just let it all sink in, that you realize that it's more interesting and more impactful and enjoyable than you initially thought. You're in the throes of reading it, you're just like, what the hell am I reading? So that's definitely a book that I have very, very mixed feelings about, and I'm kind of on the fence about how I just feel about it overall. Number 6, talk about a book genre that has elements or tropes in it that you oppose. And for this, I'm 125% going with magical realism. I am strongly opposed to reading any kind of magical realism. I've had nothing but bad luck with it. I've had nothing but disdain for the genre ever since I kind of read it. I just have not found a magical realism book that I like, and therefore it's just not something that I gravitate towards or like. If someone tells me a book is magical realism, I shut down. Like, I'm just like, okay, bye. I just want no part of that genre. Number 7, verdict. Talk about a book that made up your mind about something or solidified your feelings on a particular position or something. And for this, I'm picking a book that might surprise people, and that is Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. Julius Caesar is my favorite Shakespeare play. I love it. Not only is it because it's about a historical event that I really enjoy and find interesting. You'd be like, Katie, you enjoy someone being stabbed 23 times by their friends? I'm like, hey, you know what? Chill. But I also really like it because it made up my mind about a particular person in the books. In the historical documents, we don't know much about Brutus and Cassius. We know some things, like Brutus was particularly close with Julius Caesar, almost like a son to him, or just a really, really close relative. And you can see that in the way that Julius Caesar speaks his last line, et tu, Brute, which is very, very informal. It's like, even you, Brutus, even you, my child, my son, like, it was said in such a way and translated in such a way that it was just very informal and very personal in a lot of ways. And the thing that Shakespeare does that pretty much no one else does is gives you a side of Brutus and Cassius that you didn't necessarily get. He portrays Brutus and Cassius in such a way that it makes it very fascinating, and it makes you understand their motives a little bit more, and ultimately kind of what happened after they stab Caesar. Because there's a lot of inner turmoil that goes on. Brutus is portrayed in such a way that I really, really enjoyed, and it makes me actually enjoy his character and makes me understand him a little bit more. Cassius, he's a little shit, so I mean, my mind was already made up about Cassius before I read this, but Brutus, it kind of solidified that there was more to him, and it made my mind up about him in a different way. He is not who people think he is. He's not this evil person with all of this malintent. I mean, he had specific reasons behind what he did. And so for that reason, Julius Caesar really solidified that in my mind. Plus, it just solidified that I loved classics more than I thought I was at that particular time that I read it. I was in Latin, and I'd read, the Iliad and the Odyssey and things of that ilk, and I really enjoyed them, but this just kind of solidified it in several ways, and I just love that book for so many reasons, or that play for so many reasons. Number 8, Disbarment. Pick a book that should have its ISBN number taken away and not be sold anymore. And for this, I'm 125% picking Of Love and Other Demons by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I hated this book more than any other book that I have ever read. Arguably, it is disgusting and despicable. And guess what? It's a magical realism book. Surprise! Basically, if you haven't heard me talk about this book on my channel before, because I've definitely talked about it before, this book follows a young girl named Maria, and she is 12 when she's bitten by a rabid dog. Then she gets sent off to a convent and is exorcised every day by a priest, who's 36 by the way. Then he falls madly in love with her. They have passionate, graphic sex for 2 chapters. She dies. He can't handle himself, so he goes to an insane asylum, and that is literally the book in every facet of the word. Like, it was just awful, okay? And think of little 16-year-old Katie sitting in a literature class reading this and screaming. And also, I was at a Catholic high school, so even better. It was just not a good time. I'm just telling you that. It was bad. I hated it. And, yeah, that is my justification. Just that summary should just be all the justification you need to disbar this book. 'Cause bye. And number 9, that is defense. What book or character will you defend to the ends of the earth against haters? And I'm doing a twofold thing for this. I'm picking both a book and a character because me. But I'm also going back to my main brand because it's a tag that I've created. I gotta put my brand in there somewhere. And for the book, I am picking literally anything by J.R.R. Tolkien. A lot of people don't like Tolkien for a variety of reasons, and I will defend him and his works, whether they be fantasy or academic, to the ends of the earth. He is a genius. He is the father of fantasy and fantasy tropes, and he just deserves more love than he gets, which is not much in the book world at least. And I'm going to link my Tolkien video for you guys up above for you guys to go watch, because it just, more people need to know about him. And as for character, there are a lot of characters that I can defend, but I will 155% defend Fitz Chivalry Farseer to the death. Who will I defend Fitz? My baby Fitz makes the poorest life decisions, and he just has a really tough time of his whole life. And I know a lot of readers who don't like Fitz. And let me tell you, I can understand. The first trilogy, he's a little bit tough to handle at times. But when you sit back and you realize everything that he's gone through, everything that he has to deal with, and just his life, then you know what? It's a little bit more understandable. In fact, it's a lot more understandable. And he just deserves love, okay? He deserves all of the love and all of the kindness and all of the happiness in the world. And that's all I'm going to say on the matter, because I don't want to spoil you for anything for that series. If you haven't read it, just know my baby Fitzy, my small child, my small garbage trash baby, just love him, okay? I get where you're coming from when you're like saying he's a little annoying, but don't, okay? Just don't. A lot of reasons for why he is the way he is, and you might not necessarily think about him when you're reading, but I'm gonna point them out to you in great graphic detail if you hate on him. Okay, glad we had that chat. But anyway, that's about all I've got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this tag. I'm gonna tag a bunch of people down below that I think might be interested or might want to do this, but other than that, you guys know the drill. I have both of my social media links down below in the description. I have a Twitter, which is @ASeaOfTomes, which is the same as my handle here. I also have a Goodreads, which you guys can go follow and see what I've been reading and track my progress and see my general thoughts on things before I come scream at you about them over here. But other than that, I'll catch you later in another video for you guys again soon. Bye!